We're joined by the other half of Quiddity Advisors. That's David Blennerhassett. David is a highly experienced sell-side analyst with over 20 years experience covering Asia Pacific equities across strategies such as M&A, directional long short and holding company trades. David helps me and SocGen clients navigate the world of M&A and specifically has some incredible data on holding company situations in Asia. And more specific to today's presentation, he also likes to mine CCAS data in his spare time. Hi, David. Thanks for joining us.
Hey there, Lee. How are you going?
Good. Thank you. The floor is yours.
All right. Well, this is going to be a little bit of a sort of a different sort of presentation. It's not a high conviction sort of idea. It's very much a nuanced part of what we see in Hong Kong. But if you're doing a risk arb in Hong Kong, you need to know CCAS. And if you're a long-term investor, you really need to sort of just look under the hood and see what's in CCAS too. So without further ado, I'll just click on and start going through this sort of my presentation here for you guys. So, I mean, CCAS stands for the Central Clearing Automated Settlement sort of system. If you're going to be buying and selling shares in Hong Kong, they need to go through CCAS. It's as simple as that. And all those shares in CCAS are effectively held under HKSCC nominees. So that means if you look at a listed share register, almost the entire register of a company is held under HKSCC and pretty much nothing else. Fortunately, about 12 years ago, the Hong Kong Exchange nicely disclosed the list of CCAS participants, and now we can sort of see things such as who the brokers are, the custodians, and other sort of invest participants. If you actually want to disclose who you are within that particular broker, that's your discretion. You can actually make that known to the public, or you can actually be an unknown participant. So that's purely also prerogative. I mean, some brokers actually will hold shares which are pledged. We don't really know sometimes the full details. I'll touch on pledging shares in a little bit. But what you see in CCAS is actually operated on a T+2 sort of basis. It relates to trades 2 days early on when they were traded. Okay, so who owns what? I mean, when it comes down to, when you look at any sort of company, you really want to sort of see where the major brokers, where they hold their shares, and sometimes you're going to, in a long-term holder, would invariably just hold their shares outside of CCAS. If you're not going to be trading them, then why put them into the system? Why incur unnecessary sort of fees? And so you're going to see sometimes that, that CCAS holdings could be only 50, 30, 12, 20%, if the long-term holders actually, with the major shareholding, is going to just hold them outside of CCAS. I think it's also really useful to sort of see what mainland Chinese people are buying. I've given you the CCAS IDs for Shenzhen and Shanghai there. There are a couple of other quirky ones you'll sort of see in CCAS, which is like A*2, which to do with like Shenzhen B shares that are converted to H shares. There's a new CCAS participant ID that was created last year, which is A*5, but that relates to something called a full circulation of shares, which is really a pilot program, converting domestic shares to H shares. We're still in the nuanced area of that at the moment, so very early days, and there's only 3 companies so far that are doing that. That includes AB China and also sort of Legend. But they're not really anything to do with sort of the shareholding of the companies themselves. I think it's also, when you look at those sort of mainland sort of holdings, just to get an idea that maybe something isn't always quite right. We've seen things like TechPro, which I mentioned there, and also Fullshare. Both those companies have subsequently blown up. And in the past, they've had significant holdings from Shenzhen and Shanghai Connect. It doesn't necessarily mean if there's a large sort of shareholding from either of those that it is anything nefarious. Quite often, if you just go to the Hong Kong Exchange disclosures or annual reports, and anyone's got more than 5% will make a disclosure, even if it's held via the Connect. But there are some cases where things don't quite add up. I haven't put it here on that particular slide, but I was looking at a company just last week, which is Real Lord. 1196. It's an 850 million US dollar company. It's just made an offer for Sincere department stores here in Hong Kong. It's mainly a property company in China, and it's 75% owned by a husband and wife sort of team. About 8% of the register is actually held by Shenzhen Connect. That's about 30% of the actual float itself. I probably would leave it as that, but this company is trading at 2.8 times price to book for pretty much a property company. Maybe there's more to it. It's certainly a company that I think I wouldn't touch. I just only came across it because of it was suspended and I thought it was going to be taken over. There's a very interesting, quirky thing which happens in Hong Kong, that in a tender offer, settled shares have to move outside of CCAS. It's just the way it works. And so usually you instruct your sort of broker that you're going to accept the offer, and those shares, through a two-step sort of process going by the HKSCC, will move out of CCAS, usually in a 1 to 2 day sort of period. There's numerous examples of this, and it gives you an idea that how people are sort of tendering during the sort of like the duration of the offer itself. It gives you a bit of a clarity. It's not sometimes perfect, because there's a tendency for investors probably to tender on the last day just to make sure they keep their powder dry, their takeover situation. I've mentioned 958 because that was probably the quirkiest one. We've seen that was a hybrid offer because it's a PRC incorporated company, which involved like a scheme-like vote and then a 90% acceptance tendering condition attached to it. It got down to the 60th day and they basically got a little bit higher 80s. They did 90%, and the SFC unprecedentedly granted an extra 60 days in which to sort of get this done. But what happens in Hong Kong, and this has never happened before, after 21 days after close, or the first close in this case, you can take your shares back out that have been tendered. So you saw this massive amount of shares which moved out of CCAS, and then 21 days, a massive amount of shares moved back into CCAS, and then on the next 60-day period, they'll move back out again. And unfortunately, the deal actually fell over, which is a bit unfortunate, but that's the way it was. Personally, I think even though it's kind of fun to sort of follow it and keep an eye on things, I would prefer a system such as an acceptance facility, which we see in Australia. I think that provides a much greater sort of clarity and less opaqueness than we sort of see with the ones here in Hong Kong. Okay, let's see. I'm looking at something like this particular sort of slide sort of touches on ostensibly just the headcount rule in Hong Kong. I mentioned before that HKSCC pretty much dominates the holding for shares within a company's register. So if you have all these CCAS participants who basically, giving instructions how they want to vote at a scheme, then the HKSCC rocks up and votes en masse on behalf of the CCAS participants. And what you're going to see sometimes is that it will act as like this multi-headed voter, where one vote for, one vote against, and here are all the shares. Be that as it may, it doesn't really make much difference now for Hong Kong incorporated companies, because the headcount rule has been abolished back in 2014, but it's still in place for other companies who are incorporated in, say, Cayman Islands and Bermuda, and those two alone add up to about 78% of the listed shares, listed companies in Hong Kong. I think it might be useful to actually give an example of how this sort of works. What you're seeing here is the Li and Fung vote last week. Now, in that first little sort of bar at the top there's 252 scheme shareholders who rolled up to vote. Now, 201 voted for and 51 against. That includes the HKSCC's vote. So that means you can say that they voted once for and once against. That means there's another 200 voted for, which would be shares which would have been taken outside of CCAS, and 50 voted against, which also would have been shares taken outside of CCAS. So what happens is that if you really want to put up your hand and be counted as one person, one vote, when this is majority rule or the head count test, then you can instruct your broker to have your shares taken outside of CCAS. It's a little bit sort of finicky. You're probably looking at least 3 weeks for the whole process to work. I chatted to Tricor today, which is the register for Li and Fung, and they said it takes at least 2 weeks, once it's even outside of CCAS, to process it. So what happened with Li and Fung, because it's Bermuda incorporated, and it's at the discretion of the courts whether they want to do what they call a look-through in to see what is the composition of the HKSCC, well, always the composition of CCAS. And in that little box down the bottom here, they did just that. And actually, in terms of the votes for within HKSCC, was 40 CCAS participants and 5 investor participants, which people are just basically letting it be known who they are outside of their broker, and 25 against and CCAS participants and another 3 investor participants. So what I try to do is a little bit of a table down the bottom there, and you can see that there's the 40 of the CCAS participants voting for, and 5 of the investor participants, 45 altogether, which is actually within the HKSCC, and the 28 against. So all told, plus the 200 here of outside of CCAS voting for and 50 outside of CCAS voting against, there was 323 scheme shareholders, and you can see that overwhelmingly sort of voted for the offer itself. But that's what the look-through is. That's how it comes about. And sometimes it really doesn't really matter too much. There have been instances in the past where it has. There was that unusual case for Glorious Property in 2014, I believe. And in terms of that particular sort of initial vote, like we sort of see for Li and Fung, the vote was 58 versus 62. And actually, it had failed the headcount rule. But if they had bothered to do a look-through, then the numbers were actually more like 139.96. Why they didn't bother to do the look-through, I don't know. And that remains to be seen why it didn't occur. So again, it is up to discretion, but that is how CCAS is useful when it comes to doing a look-through, and how sometimes, and I'll talk about this in a second, why people will actually move shares outside of CCAS just so they can actually be voted upon. Every week, I do like a summary of all event-driven ideas written on Smart Karma. Some of them are mine, some of them Travis, who just spoke earlier, and from others, the contributors. And I also do a bit of a wrap of some CCAS movements during the week. Large moves, in this case, I use a 10% as a bit of a cut-off, otherwise I'd be spending all my time on it, and just sort of see where those shares have moved. And then I'll refer back to the Hong Kong Stock Exchange sort of announcements to see if there's been like a rights issue or new shares issued, in which case you can just ignore it. They could actually be to do with shares being pledged and moving into a broker, which normally that would be shares outside of CCAS, which might have moved in, if that might be the case. It could also be a precursor to an offer, and we've seen that in the past. But unfortunately, when it comes to sort of pledging, the only rule that's in place now in Hong Kong is that if in the first 12 months of a company being listed, that the major shareholder, one who owns 30% or more, must make a notification if they've actually pledged their shares. But after that 12 months has lapsed, there's no more necessity to do so. The only time they would have to actually make a notification about shares pledged is that if there was a loan or guarantee back to the company itself in which the shares were pledged. So unfortunately, it's a bit of a little bit opaque there, and sometimes you can work it out. But so that's why I sometimes flag and keep an eye on it. The other thing is, this is going back to some of the other oddities that I guess sort of creeps into the sort of CCAS and can make things interesting. There was the whole sort of share split of PCCW back in 2009. The reason why they did that, because it's very much a retail, heavily retail held company, and there wasn't particularly a lucrative or fantastic premium that the Li family pitched to shareholders. And so there's concern a lot of the mums and dads would roll up and en masse and stick up their hand and vote it down. And so there was a lot of, there was this, unfortunately, a bit of a sort of share split. They went down there to try and sort of pack the deck in terms of the 4 voting element at the headcount test. There was someone tipped up the SEC, and there was investigated, and then that was shot down, only because actually share splitting is actually illegal in Hong Kong. It has been since '92. There was also another case in 2017 for Bell International, which I put up there too. They also took out an enormous amount of shares out of CCAS to enable both the offer and also the employees to vote at the meeting and be recognised. The difference here is that Bell actually made an announcement along those lines. That's what they were trying to do. The wording was a little bit sort of quirky, but it was upfront about it, and the SFC let it go. And there's the two examples where people just want to make sure that when a headcount test is actually underway, that they can actually make sure that it goes in their direction as best they can. So that's pretty much it's a short discussion. I mean, CCAS can actually offer up some interesting little nuances, and I think it's worth sort of digging into and kicking some tires and seeing what actually is evolving and worth checking out. If you feel that way inclined, you can even just go down to the register itself and pay a token fee and click through the register yourself. Unfortunately, they're not online, but you can actually cite them in person, and you can take photos of the registrar if to your heart's content. But there you go. That's my sort of quick little wrap on the CCAS. As I said, I do a weekly sort of summary, and I keep an eye on things which might stand out and could unfold as to be an offer or something else. If there's any questions on this area, let me know.
Very good, David. Thank you for your presentation on the role, I guess, the role that CCAS plays here. It's probably an easy thing to not understand and overlook, to be honest. But you know, your data and insight is, I think, certainly relevant. After all, we're talking about movement of stock, right? And sometimes it can be very large. So, you know, in the investing world of picking what comes next, I think that's quite an important thing to pay attention to. Now, we do have a few questions that have come in. Thankfully, you've left a little more time than Travis left me on the last one, but so we probably don't need to rush through these as fast. But the first question is, can you give some recent examples of movements in CCAS that were of interest?
Oh yeah, sure. Okay. Well, last week was a fun one. I mean, there was Leifong Holdings 1125 was subject to an offer. Its major shareholder was eSun 571, owned 50% of the company. If eSun tendered in their shares, the deal was done, return on conditional respects. But for eSun to tender in their shares, they need their shareholders to vote for or against. Personally, they shouldn't have voted for it because the deal was rubbish. But anyway, they did. And I believe that was a Tuesday. Straight afterwards, eSun must have notified their broker to tender in their shares immediately. And you notice the next day that you can see on the HKSCC, which is like this halfway place before the shares moved out of CCAS, a big chunk of shares representing most of eSun's holding looked like it'd been tendered. And there was probably a 3.5% spread to terms. It wasn't a particularly liquid company, but you knew that something was going to turn unconditional almost ASAP. And I quickly wrote about it, and actually that night it did. 3.5%, maybe not a lot, but that's it was apparent. One other one I can think of is that there's news back in November last year, a company called Singtao News, one of the local newspapers here, that was in discussion about potential sort of takeover. And in March this year, about 48% moved within CCAS, which can only be the major shareholder, a guy called Charles Ho. That was in March. I suspect that it was probably predicated on maybe discussions ongoing. No offer has been announced as yet, but I feel that was probably, it is tied in together. But there are just a couple that have come to mind recently.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you, David. Next question is, what are your findings when observing large CCAS moves in general?
It's usually negative. I do a sort of a biannual wrap-up or twice a year wrap-up of all these sort of CCAS moves. I flag them weekly and collated together, and roughly I've seen 70% of those companies involved underperform the HSI on a 3, 6, 12-month basis. It certainly is skewed more the fact that the lower the market cap, the worse it'll probably perform. Things get improve a little bit more as the market cap increases, usually north of 500 million US dollars. And if the amount of shares actually changing hands within CCAS is also higher, you see less underperformance and sometimes, if anything, outperformance. But my takeaway, it's usually negative for these companies. And in fact, what I don't usually disclose the names of, but can always talk to people offline, that some brokers, if the shares move into them, they almost have a 100% fail rate in terms of the HSI. Make it that way you will.
Yeah. Okay. Make sure you flag the next one to me into that broker. So why do you think that is? I mean, you're commenting that generally there's a underperformance post CCAS moves. I mean, why would that be? Is it a case of more potential supply coming to market if it's a pledge of shares, or what do you put it down to in terms of the underperformance?
Yeah, I think you sort of touched on it. My takeaway with it, it's probably to do with the pledge of shares, which maybe the company's interests are not particularly in the full interest of maybe the major shareholders. It's the only thing I can sort of get comfort on, but unfortunately, it's just something that is still out there in the ether, and I haven't been able to pinpoint exactly.
Okay.
But that'll be my guess.
Yeah, cool, no problem. Next question is there a CCAS equivalent for SGX?
I wish there was. If anyone knows one out there, let me know. I mean, I've contacted like you, Lee, and I've been following takeovers in Singapore, and I'm not aware that you get any sort of indication or clarity of a running tendering total leading up to the close. It's usually that's it. Like the Wheelock privatization, and which all of a sudden just gets up, and you just have no clue that it's going to happen.
More.
If anyone is aware of one, wants to share that information, I'd be more than happy to receive it.
Sure. Let me see. What about and the next one is what about in the United States? I mean, do we have an equivalent for the US?
No, I look at US sporadically and inconsistently, actually.
Yes.
And so I'm probably not the best person to answer that question. So maybe I should leave it like that. I don't know. I don't think so.
Yeah, no problem. We're out of questions on the platform, so I might just ask one of my own. What strikes me as perhaps actionable would be any large move in shares around or after an IPO lockup expiry. Do you think this is something that's relevant for investors to look out for? Have you seen any instance during your work where you've seen a sort of large move in CCAS before a block?
Yeah, I'm sure people who track IPOs keep an eye on lockups and aware of that. But I do this on a weekly basis. I do break it down between the large moves, which I can't find any reason for it, and then also that if I just go back through time and I find that this particular company is for 6 months or 12 months or 18 months or one of those sort of like variables that to me would indicate that these are shares actually invariably moving into CCAS, and which will be therefore recently listed sort of companies. It doesn't necessarily mean that these shareholders are looking to sort of sell, but the fact that they're moving to CCAS it gives them the flexibility to do so. And so I do flag that also on a weekly sort of basis. And
yes,
I mean, personally, yeah, I think it's predicated on the fact that there's probably going to be some selling in the market and there's some selling pressure. And I think it's pretty apparent to sort of see when this actually starts to occur.
Yes. David, I've got a question here that's segueing away from CCAS. I think it's obviously someone from the market who knows your expertise in holding companies. So if we could just quickly go with this question, a holdco question. The question is, David, you talk a bit about family-driven privatizations that you're seeing in Hong Kong, and it seems the godfathers see good value. Obviously, we're seeing Peter Wu take Wheelock private. I guess the question is, you know, what's next? I mean, are there any other potential family-driven privatizations on the horizon in your mind?
Yeah. Well, there's rumours that Hong Kong Town Gas might be the next one on the block, 3HK. In terms of maybe mopping up some of the shareholdings themselves, in terms of taking out the actual parent company, you know, I guess there's something like even like a Hang Lung could be quite interesting. I don't know whether Ronnie Chang is really that way inclined. He definitely moves on a pedestrian glacial pace. That to me looks quite interesting. In terms of holding company structures, I think the one that's probably going to get super interesting is going to be the Swire flagged Cathay Pacific and the recent report. But something has to happen there, I think. And it's a question of whether John Swire and Sons are willing to give up their little baby and let it go to Air China, or stump up some serious amount of cash, either directly or indirectly via Swire. But major privatizations, I guess it remains to be seen. I do know, living in Hong Kong, that the Hong Kong tycoons have been incredibly quiet for the last 5 months during the COVID-19 outbreak, and which is interesting. So it does seem to suggest that maybe there's something, could be something brewing, but we literally have not heard a peep really from most of the major tycoons.
Yes. Thank you, David. Hey, I think that's all we've got time for this afternoon. Thanks so much for your time and your fascinating insight into CCAS.
No worries.
We appreciate it. Now we'll hand back over to Amanda and the Smart Karma team for the next presentation.
Take care. See you later. Thanks for your time.